So the question says, if omega is a cube root of unity, then the value of this determinant is, which is 1 plus omega, omega square minus omega, 1 plus omega square, omega minus omega square, omega plus omega square, omega minus omega square. So what we will do is, the first operation we can apply here is column 1 is column 1 plus column 2, which is 1 plus omega square, 1 plus omega square plus omega, omega plus omega square plus omega. This will remain as it is, omega square, omega, omega, minus omega square and minus omega square. The other two columns will remain as it is. So here in this question, it is given to us that omega is the cube root of unity, right, which is omega to the power 3. In the question it is given to us that omega to the power 3 is equal to 1, which is omega is the cube root of unity. So if we actually find out the cube root of 1, it has 3 different values, which is 1 itself, then there is omega and omega square. 1 is a real root, which is 1. Cube root of 1 is 1, which is a real root, and these two are imaginary, and hence they are given this name omega and omega square. So the sum of these roots is equal to 0. And another information that we need to use in this question is that cube root of 1 is omega, which means omega to the power 3 is 1. So here we will use this information, 1 plus omega square is equal to 0. So this term will become 0. This will also become 0. This will be omega square plus 2 omega, omega square, omega, omega, minus omega square and minus omega square. So here we can simplify this term which we have got, which is omega square plus 2 omega. It can be written as, so omega square plus omega plus 1 is equal to 0. So omega square is 1 minus omega, right? So we will substitute this value of omega square in this term that we have got, omega square plus 2 omega, where we can write omega as minus 1 minus omega plus 2 omega. So that will be equal to minus 1 minus omega plus 2 omega will give us plus omega. So we can write this as, in the determinant we can write 0, 0 and minus 1 plus omega, and here omega square, omega, omega, minus omega square and minus omega square. Alright, so now let us expand this determinant. So expansion of the first column will give us 0 plus 0 minus 1 plus omega into, we will exclude the terms which are in its column and its corresponding row, and the rest will get multiplied, minus omega square into omega square minus omega into omega. Alright, so this will be minus 1 plus omega into minus omega to the power 4, minus into minus plus omega square. So we have got this expression. Let us simplify it. Remember that we can write omega to the power 4 as omega to the power 3 into omega. As we know that omega to the power 3 is 1. So 1 into omega is omega. So omega to the power 4 can be written as omega. right? So minus 1 plus omega into minus omega plus omega square. From this second equation that we have got, we are writing this. Okay. So minus omega into minus 1 will be plus omega minus omega square minus omega square plus omega to the power 3. On expansion of the determinant, we get the result as omega minus omega square plus omega cube. Alright, so we know that omega cube is equal to 1. So we can write omega minus omega square plus 1. 1 plus omega minus 2 omega square. So we also know the relation 1 plus omega square is equal to 0. Hence we can write 1 plus omega is equal to minus omega square. So we will use this result here. Minus omega square minus 2 omega square will give us minus 3 omega square. So this is the answer.